All right. Hello, everyone, and welcome to another Azul strategy video. In this video, I'm going to attempt to talk about the common end of round scenarios and how to either force certain tiles on your opponent or how to avoid having tiles forced on you. This is a topic that has been requested a number of times, and I have never done a video on it, partially because ideally to do this video I would have like an Azul sandbox where I could create scenarios and go back and forth and show, if this then that. But the replay viewer on Board Game Arena doesn't really allow for that. And so I have put off doing this video, but I got another recent request to do it, so I'm going to take my best stab at it. And basically I have picked a random game here that I'm going to review with the sole purpose of highlighting these end of round scenarios. And I think in addition to just looking at the common scenarios, I also want to talk about when to start considering the end of the round, because I think that's probably where people get into more trouble. It's less about not knowing the common scenarios and maybe more about not realizing that you should be thinking about the end of the round sooner, and getting stuck in a situation where you're going to be forced to take big negatives because you thought you were safe, but really you weren't. So I am going to try to capture some screenshots and just like take some notes, so that you can refer to certain board positions later. I won't do too much note taking during the video to keep the video shorter, but I'll just capture some screenshots as we go. So like I said, we're just going to review this game, and I'm going to be thinking specifically about the end of round situations. So I won't necessarily be talking about the whole game. So let's dive in. And I think I will keep tile counts, just because it could come up, however unlikely. And this is an interesting board from the perspective of end of round scenarios because there's only 4 colors. We are in the first round, so it's slightly unlikely to come into play here. But let's kind of go through a couple of plays and see where we end up. Yeah, I don't think there's really going to be anything here. In the first round, when I'm thinking about the end of the round, the situation that usually comes up is if I have developed some of my lower rows first, which did not happen for me or my opponent. But if I have spent my first couple of plays on rows 4 and 5, then I need to be really mindful of making sure that I can still get rows 1 and 2. Sometimes you can get caught in a situation where your opponent only leaves you with one more pick when you have both of your top rows open. So that won't be the case in this game. But we will soldier on to round 2. Okay, so we've got some yellow in this round. Now, getting into like when to start thinking about the end of the round, one thing that can be a trigger for that, I guess, is cases where you or your opponent cannot play a certain color. So, for example, it's not going to be the case in this round, but let's say there had been like 6 blues. I have already filled my blue row 2 and blue row 3. So the only place I can play blue is on row 1. So if my opponent didn't need blues, which they do, they could basically from the start of the round be trying to manufacture a situation in which I get these blue negatives dumped on me. So that's a little bit more of maybe like macro strategy and less specific end of round scenarios, but that's one of the things that can get you focused on the end of the round. So if you identify at the beginning of a round that your opponent can't play a certain color, you should be very aware of the end of the round scenario and how you can exploit that. So let's do the tiles. And let's go through. Okay, so let's see if there's anything here. I think this is a bit too early for end of round considerations. But yeah, nothing makes sense quite yet here. Let's see. Okay, so here's a bit of a situation. I mean, this is a very basic one, but if there are all 5 colors remaining and 1 factory left, and it doesn't matter what the combinations are really. I suppose it does matter a little bit, but in this scenario where there's 5 colors in the middle and 1 factory left, if I take from the factory, I will guarantee that my opponent has the last pick. So the math here is that there's an odd number of colors and my opponent goes next. So it will be their turn, then my turn, then their turn, then my turn, then their turn. So those will be the 5 remaining turns because there are 5 colors. That is, should I pick from this factory, that will result in all 5 colors being in the center. Now, this also works for 3 colors because, again, it's an odd number of colors. So if there were 3 colors in the middle and the same 3 colors on the factory, if I take from the factory, then my opponent is stuck with the last pick. So let me just quickly screenshot this, and actually I don't even need the boards. So for a common scenario, this is 5 colors remaining on your turn, 5 colors remaining, and 1 factory with tiles on your turn. So I'll write more about what this means. Another interesting thing that I've talked about in other videos which is not usually how you get to this place. But what happens if I take blue or white in this scenario? So if I take blue or white, then there's 4 colors in the middle with 1 factory, and it's my opponent's turn. So basically, like, pretend this blue tile isn't here, and these are the remaining colors, and it's my opponent's turn. Can they force me to have the last pick? Pause the video if you want to work this one out, but the answer is no. So if there are 4 colors in the middle and there's 1 factory remaining and the 5th color is not on that factory, in other words, like, there's no way to introduce an odd number of colors, then you are safe from the last pick. So if that blue tile is not there and it's my opponent's turn, no matter what they do, they cannot force the last pick on me. If they take anything from the factory, there will still be 4 colors in the middle. And then it's my turn. I take 1. There's 3 remaining. Them, me, them. They end up with the last pick. So if you can have the scenario where there's 4 colors in the middle and 1 factory without the 5th color, then you cannot be forced to take the last pick. So that's another common scenario. In most cases, you arrive at it by there being like a second factory that you pick from to put the 4 colors in the middle. But here, if I take blue or white, I could arrive at that scenario as well. Now, the other thing to think about is when you want to force your opponent to have the last pick. And in this case, there are no big negatives to hand around because my opponent has row 4 black open, and I have row 3 black open. So neither of us are going to get stuck with these blacks. So this isn't necessarily a scenario in which I'm either trying to force negatives on my opponent. I'm also not trying to protect myself from negatives. So this is a case where, I'm probably not going to make a play based on the end of the round scenario. But just to highlight what could happen here, if I choose to take from the factory, I will guarantee that my opponent gets the last pick. If I were to take blue or white, I create the 4 colors in the center scenario where my opponent cannot force the last pick on me because the 5th color is not on this remaining factory. So let's see what happens. I take a red, and yeah, so like I said, there's no real benefit to either of us forcing the last pick because we don't actually really want to group these blacks together because we both kind of benefit from it. Okay, so now maybe I have some incentive to force the last pick because I want my opponent to end up with these 2 blacks instead of me ending up with these 2 blacks. So this is the same common scenario, basically. There are 5 colors left. So how would I go about forcing the last pick on my opponent? In this case, I can take either of the 2 yellow tiles because that's the color that is duplicated. And it doesn't matter which one I take because the end scenario is the same. So taking this yellow tile is the same as taking this because nothing ends up getting grouped in the center. So I think it's reasonably likely that I take a yellow tile here. 1, because my opponent wants row 4 yellow, and 2, because it forces the 2 black on them and they don't have anywhere good to play it. Like, they really don't want to play black on row 4 because it blocks their yellow. So can't guarantee it, but I think me taking 1 yellow, either for row 1 or to throw away is probably what I did. Yep. And so now we'll see this play out. My opponent takes blue. I'm sure I take, okay, throw away a yellow. And yeah, now they're faced with this pretty terrible decision of, do they go -11 or play these two blacks outside, misaligned with their column? And now I have a 9-0 lead, partially because of that play. And you can see, like I said, it didn't make sense until they took the 2 black up top, which eliminated the row 4 black possibility. It didn't really make sense to force anything yet, so we kind of danced around it. And then once it made sense, we went in for the play that forced those negatives on them. Okay. Okay, so let's see what we have here. So are there any colors that stick out as, you know, being particularly strong for forcing negatives? Probably not at this stage in the round. So we'll kind of click through for a bit. Okay. So here's a scenario where, let's see, let me screenshot this one. So this is 5 colors, 2 factories, your turn. Now, I should say 5 colors in the middle, perhaps. Now, what can happen here that I need to be careful for, not in this specific scenario, but if I take anything from a factory, whether it's this factory or this factory, if I take anything, there will be 5 colors in the middle with 1 factory left. And what do we know about 5 colors in the middle with 1 factory left? That's this scenario. And so my opponent will be able to force the last pick on me. So let's say I had something on row 4 already played. If I decide, you know, oh, I really want this 1 blue, play that 1 blue, my opponent can force these 5 yellows on me. Hopefully that makes sense. But if I take anything from a factory, it puts 5 colors in the middle with 1 factory remaining on my opponent's turn, which means they can force the last play on me. So in this scenario, I have row 4 yellow open, so I'm not scared of taking these yellows. But in a different scenario, I would already be thinking about what's going to happen at the end of the round and probably pick from the middle because of that, to stay safe and continue the dance of who is going to end up picking last. Okay, so let's see what my opponent does. But again, we can play a fictional scenario. So this, well, I'll have to screenshot the 4 colors, but we talked about the 4 colors in the middle on your opponent's turn with 1 factory left. So let's say my opponent was really scared of those yellows as well. If they take the 1 white, that puts 4 colors in the middle for my turn with 1 factory without the 5th color. That would mean that I cannot force the last pick on them. And so they would be safe from those yellows. Obviously, in this scenario, they want those yellows for their row 4, but just for the sake of example, if you wanted to protect yourself in a scenario like this, you could take this 1 white and introduce 4 colors in the middle with with the 5th color not on the last remaining factory. Okay, so they set themselves up for the situation where I can force the last pick on them by taking from the factory, since there's 5 colors in the middle. And let's see if that makes sense. It's not particularly strong for me to take either the yellow or the black. Just based on my board, it doesn't make a ton of sense. I don't really have anywhere to place this black. So what could I think about here? So again, I'm in the position, and maybe I should screenshot this scenario. I'm in the position of being able to create the 4 colors. And actually, I'll just note that as a subcategory of this. You can create 4 colors with 1 factory on opponent's turn. Protects you from going last. So instead of making a play here to force my opponent to go last, something I could do is like take a white, for example, or take a red for my row 1. And that way my opponent can't force these 3 blacks on me. I could also take the 2 blue. So basically any way to leave 4 colors in the center means that my opponent can't force anything on me. So let's see what I do. I think one option is like take this red on row 5 and then leave blue or white for row 1. Another option could just be to take the red for row 1 since it's the best adjacency play. But from a strategy perspective here, I'm not gaining much by forcing colors on my opponents in this scenario, just because these black and yellow don't really make sense for me. So maybe I make a play to protect myself instead. So let's see. Okay, so I take the 2 blue for row 1, presumably to create tension for my opponent's board, because they want 2 yellow for row 4. And now that I've taken these 2 blues, their only remaining row 2 play is yellow. So now they have to choose between yellow on row 2 and yellow on row 4. And for them, so they have, as I said, we can actually see this play out. So if you look at this board, there's no way for them to force the last pick on me. If they take black, then there's 4 colors, which means me, them, me, them. If they take yellow, there's 4 colors, me, them, me, them. So the thing that you can do in this scenario, if you don't want to be forced to make the last pick, is to take a tile that makes it awkward for your opponent to force the last pick on you. So what I mean by that is, let's say my opponent takes 1 black here. If they take 1 black, so eliminate that black from the center, my only play to force the last pick on them is to take the 2 black, because I need to get down to 3 colors, right? So there's yellow, red, and white in the center already. If I take the yellow, then I introduce black to the center. That's 4 colors in the center, and it's their turn. So then it's them, me. But if they took this black and I take those 2 black, then there's 3 colors and it's them, me, them. However, do I want to take those 2 black? No, I have nowhere to play them. So if you find yourself on the receiving end of the 4 colors in the middle scenario, and you don't want the last pick. If taking the last pick is fine for you, then do whatever you want. But if you really don't want the last pick, if there's a lot of negatives coming your way, try to pick a tile that makes it awkward for your opponent to force the last pick on you. So in this case, my opponent could pick black, and then I would have to take the 2 black from this factory to force the last pick on them, and obviously I have nowhere good to play 2 black, so that would be super awkward for me. That being said, in this actual scenario, not the hypothetical scenario, they want 2 yellow, and they don't care if the 3 black gets grouped because they can play 3 black. So they don't really have to worry about who gets the last pick in this case, because they can handle the 3 black. So they can try to force them on me. As I said, I've protected myself against that. So we'll see what they do. Yeah, so they just take the yellow. And now, I kind of just have to let them get this 3 black. It's, not that beneficial for them. So we're just going to let them have it. Sorry, I will try to tap to click instead of actually clicking because I'm sure that's coming through. Okay, so hopefully that round was pretty instructive. I think that was a good situation of highlighting multiple scenarios and how those scenarios progress and link into each other as you near the end of the round. Okay, so let's continue on. Okay, and maybe this is a good time to talk about like when you don't necessarily have to think about the end of the round, and when you do. So in this case, you might think, oh, there's still 3 factories, there's tiles in the middle, like the end of the round isn't important in this case. But based on what we just talked about, if I, let's say, take this 3 yellow, and actually, let me say it a different way. If I introduce this red into the center, so there are still 5 colors remaining, but right now this red is on a factory. If I introduce this red to the center by taking these 3 yellows, then my opponent can take from either of these 2 factories and create a situation where all 5 colors are in the center. Does that harm me in this scenario? No, not really. Because I'll have the option to choose from the center or the remaining factory, and we kind of saw how that played out in the last round. But let's say I take this red and play it on row 1 or row 5. Now there's 4 colors in the center, and my opponent cannot possibly introduce the 5th because it's gone. So if they take from one of these factories with 4 colors in the center, then they create the 4 colors with 1 factory remaining scenario. And I will not be able to force any last round tiles on them, or any last pick tiles on them. So even this far away with only 2 factories gone, I can already start thinking about what could happen at the end of this round. And again, in this case, there's not too much to worry about. Like, the biggest negatives I can take are these yellows, but worst comes to worst, I play 6 on row 3, I score a good number of points, and I take some negatives, but it's not awful. If I didn't have somewhere to play these yellows, it's a little more dangerous. But so just to recap, and I'll screenshot this. This is going to be a tough one to explain, but if you take red here, opponent can create 4 colors in center with 1 factory remaining. And I need to screenshot the 4 colors scenario at some point so that you know what I'm referencing there. But yeah, so hopefully that makes sense. By taking 1 red here, my opponent can protect themselves against the last pick. Now, in this case, I wouldn't be surprised if I do take the 1 red here. There's only 3 left, and I need 2. So it's pretty important color or tile for me. And additionally, like, I can see that my opponent's most likely going to play these yellows, so they're not a huge threat to me. Maybe I take the 3 yellows. I don't know. I think probably not, because I have row 3 black available also, so I'm pretty flexible there. But yeah, let's see about this red. Okay, so let's screenshot this, because this can so this can create 4 colors in center scenario by taking from factory, and I won't do much more than that. Okay, so yeah, from my opponent's perspective, I think there's not too much to be worried about, because they can play these yellows, they can play the whites, they can play the blacks. So in this case, like, there's probably not a lot of thought going on around the end of round scenario. And like I said, for me, you know, I can play the whites here, I can play the yellows or the blacks on row 3. So I'm also not too worried about the tile situation. Now, I'm sorry, the negatives situation. But the thing I could start thinking about is how to sequence things such that my opponent is not going to have a good time. And actually, maybe there is something here to think about. So let's say you see this, that your opponent has 1 yellow left on row 2 and also 1 yellow that they want on row 1. And so you say, ooh, like, I want to take this 1 yellow away from them. Now, what happens if you take that 1 yellow away? And I'll give you a second if you want to pause and think about it. But if you take this 1 yellow, you give your opponent the opportunity to force the last pick on you by taking these 2 yellows. Now, I said that I wasn't worried about dealing with negatives, but the thing I could be worried about is not being able to play on row 1. Now, if I take this yellow and my opponent takes these 2 yellows, it's going to group up all the whites. And that's a really expensive row 1 for me. That being said, this would be a scenario in which I'd be willing to give up that row 1 because I can play those whites for a good number of points on row 4. So there's a little bit of, back and forth and trade-offs there. Like, you don't necessarily have to be scared of taking this 1 yellow. I think it's still a very strong play, even if my opponent forces these whites to get grouped up, because I kind of happily play those whites for a bunch of points. But I could go different routes. I could take 1 white now to protect my row 1 investment, or if I take this 1 yellow, I have to be aware of the risks, which is that I could end up with the last pick. And in this scenario, it's not that bad. So I would be willing to take the one white or the one yellow here as a defensive option, even though it might mean I lose out on a row 1 pick. Now, there's another factor, which is that there's only 2 black left. So losing out on that row 1 pick might mean that I can't end the game in the 5th round. So kind of a lot of factors to this decision. I didn't really intend to talk too much about the actual in-game decision versus just the color scenarios, but yeah, you can see all the factors that you have to consider, and what it means to allow your opponent to group up these whites, and how it all ties together with like just taking this one yellow looks like a simple defensive play. All of a sudden you're in kind of a pickle yourself. So let's see what I do here. I wouldn't be surprised either way. I think one yellow is a fine play. You could go real simple, just take like 3 black, just score some points, and then go get a white later. So let's see what I decide. Okay, so I take the white, and kind of an interesting play, I think. The logic could be a number of things. One is, I've created this group of 4 black that might be tempting for my opponent, but if they take it, it's kind of a trap, because then I can group up these yellows and they can't get good adjacency on both row 1 and row 2. And then similarly, let's say they take the 1 yellow. I can throw out these 2 yellows and create 3 colors in the middle, which we know means that they will go last. And they would probably have to take these whites away from me, which means they're playing 3 whites somewhere awkwardly. So yeah, let's see. So they take the black, and then I'm positive we will see me group these yellows up by taking the whites. And yeah, like, look at this situation. They either overpay for yellows on row 2, and then I finish my row 4, and they get, again, overpay for a non-adjacent row 1. Or they take 1 white away from me. I get a nice row 3 yellow. And then again, they do the same, overpaying on row 1 blue. So this was an example of where, like, having flexibility in your board can, or maybe recognizing the flexibility in your board can pay dividends. Like, I talked about the fact that I could take those 3 black earlier, which I think would have been a fine play. But, by leaving it open, I've created just like a huge win-win scenario for me, where no matter what my opponent does here, it's kind of awkward for them and it's pretty great for me. So yeah, they'll take those yellows. And, in my in-game commentary videos, I talk a lot about, like, small negatives become big negatives. And you can see, like, you don't think your opponent taking 1 extra tile on their row 1 is that big a deal, but over the course of the round, these things accumulate to be -8. And we kept our side of the board very clean. Okay, so round 5 can be a bit different, I guess, from a end of round scenario. Well, maybe not so much. I guess I should say the end of round scenario can be extra critical in round 5, because obviously you have no chance to come back. Oftentimes people have unfilled rows, incomplete rows entering round 5, and so the opportunity to get people with big negatives is there. So the math and the calculations are the same, but you just want to be like extra tight on what the possibilities could be for the end of round 5 if you have a vulnerability. Now, my board basically has no vulnerability. I have all my rows open. I can play all these colors. My opponent's board basically has no vulnerability. They have most of their, prior to this play, they had all of their rows open, and they can play all these colors. So at least at the start of the round, there's nothing here to think about yet. So let's keep going. Okay, so based on what we've talked about thus far, there is a play that I can make here that would protect me from having to pick last. This is not a play that I need to make in this scenario, and probably not a play that I should make in this scenario because it doesn't benefit me. But if I really wanted to protect myself against negatives, if that was like the main way I could lose, which when you have a big point lead, one of the main ways you can lose is by, quote, accidentally like going -14 in round 5. So you need to be really mindful, even when you have a big lead, of your negatives. Okay, so what is the play that I could make, and what is the common scenario that I can create? So the play that I can make is taking these 2 reds. Now, if I take these 2 reds, I introduce the 4 colors in the middle scenario with 1 tile remaining, or 1 factory remaining. And so my opponent cannot force me to take the last pick. In this case, does it make sense for me to take 2 red? Not really. So I probably won't do that. I have some interesting options here. I assume at this point in the game, I'm not too worried because I'm up by 20, so I might make some suboptimal plays. But, one thing that's beneficial for me is grouping these 2 blacks together because I need those for row 2. And if I group them now, my opponent will have to defend them by taking the first player tile also, which is an extra negative. That being said, like, do I really want to take a white or a yellow? Maybe not. But it's also beneficial for me to group these blues together since my opponent wants row 2 blue and row 3 blue. So if I can make this group of 3, that makes things really awkward for them, where I can deny them one of those 2 rows. So honestly, maybe I just took 1 black. Taking 1 black here is decent because it creates that blue scenario, and if they want to defend it, they have to take that center black. Yep, let's see what they do. Okay, so they opt to not defend it, and in fact they force the first player token on me, and they forced the last pick on me. So I actually should have talked about this scenario from that perspective. By taking the 1 black from the factory, I created this opportunity. So I created the opportunity for them to put 5 colors in the middle, which means that I go last. Now, as I said, in this case, it doesn't matter. My rows are open. I can play all of these colors. But in a different situation, that could have been really dangerous for me to take that 1 black there and give them this opportunity. So at times, when there are 3 factories left, you definitely want to be aware. But when there's 2 factories left, you almost always want to be aware. So if you have no other trigger to remember when to start paying attention to what the end of round sequence could be, at the very least, when there's two factories left, start thinking about it. And this game will play out kind of boringly from here. There's nothing really to think about. So, yeah, I hope that this was instructive. Like I said, I tried to just find scenarios in this game. This wasn't a game that like particularly lent itself to those scenarios, but hopefully between the real examples in this game and some of the hypotheticals, I was able to cover what the common situations are, what to think, when to start thinking about the end of round scenarios, and also when it doesn't matter. I think something that even I get tripped up on still is sometimes I get too focused on who's going to get the last pick, when like taking the last pick for me would be fine anyway. Like my board can handle it. But once you start looking for it, it's hard not to look for it. So you want to identify those situations where, it doesn't actually really matter. Sometimes it's worth it actually to give yourself more plays. So let's say there's a scenario in which you can either create 3 colors on your opponent's turn, which means you get 1 play left, them, you, them. Or you can create 4 colors left, in which case you get 2 plays left and you go last. Maybe you can, score points on both of those remaining 2 plays. You probably want that versus creating a situation where you only get 1 play and can only score points on 1 play. So there's a lot of factors. Hopefully this video was useful. I'm happy to walk through another game in this fashion. I think it actually went better than I thought. So please leave questions, comments. Let me know if you want me to do another one of these with this particular focus. And yeah, thanks for watching. I know it's been like over a month since my last video, so apologies for not doing any content creation lately. But yeah, hopefully I get back into a little bit more of a rhythm. So yeah, thanks everyone, and see you next time.